Welcome to High Stakes. I'm your host, Tracey Devlyn. On this show, I chat with authors about the moments in their stories that change everything, what's at stake, what it costs, and why we can't look away. From thrillers to romance to sci-fi and beyond. Let's get to it. Joining me today is USA Today bestselling author and host of the popular Killer Women podcast, Danielle Girard, to talk about her new thriller, Pinky Swear. Welcome to the show, Danielle.
Tracy, thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to be here.
Oh, so happy to have you. Just a quick fun fact for our listeners and viewers before we dive in. I'm not even sure if you know this or not, but Danielle is the reason I'm a podcaster.
Oh,
I've
wow. I
You
did
are.
not know that, and I don't know if to be a little scared or very honored. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it was one of those a couple of years ago. I fangirled you at a conference in Minnesota, and you actually introduced me to Pam, the executive producer of Authors on the Air. And yeah, and it just kind of went from there. It's history, as they say, you know. But yeah, it's opened up a whole new world for me, and it's allowed me to meet authors like you that I admire and to pay it forward. So thank you, Danielle. I realized that I might not have ever have had an opportunity to thank you before.
No, well, and Pam is really, she's the mastermind, right? I ended up in the same thing. I got introduced to Pam, and next thing you know, I'm on the air. So she's quite a mastermind. But yeah, no, it's a wonderful way to connect to other authors and hear about their process, and I love it too. So, and
Yeah.
I'll look forward to having you on Killer Women. We'll have to get that
Yeah,
going.
that would be great. That would be great. Well, before we get into Pinky Swear, why don't you just tell us a bit about yourself, whatever you'd like to share?
Well, Pinky Swear is my 17th novel, so I've been at this for quite a long time. All of my previous novels feature someone in law enforcement, a woman in law enforcement, from like the Department of Justice, homicide inspector, sex crimes inspector, medical examiner. And Pinky Swear is a departure for me. Pinky Swear is about just a regular old woman in her late 30s who is married to a man with older children. And she had married him happily and thought she was going to be fine to raise his kids. And then decides, of course, that she wants her own baby. And she suffers from idiopathic infertility, which means for no good medical reason, she cannot get pregnant or stay
Mm,
pregnant. And so she's a little heartbroken that she isn't going to realize this dream. And then her best friend from high school, and they sort of lost touch after the third in their trio died, and sort of tragically their senior year. Her best friend sort of finds her, is leaving an abusive marriage, and Lexi, the protagonist, takes her in, and Mara agrees to be her surrogate, and it seems like absolute perfection. These
yeah.
two, they were as close as sisters, and it all seems perfect until 4 days before the baby is due, and Mara disappears. So Lexi has to figure out where she went, where the baby is, and it has a very fun, natural ticking time clock because the baby is going to be born, and then realistically harder to track down, right?
Yeah, 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 absolutely. No, it was an amazing story. I really, really loved Pinky Swear, and there's a wonderful twist towards the end there too that I think readers will love. And I was kind of curious. You were talking about this being a bit of a departure from what you've written before with your police procedurals. Was that a bit terrifying, or were you excited by that prospect? Tell us a little bit about
I
that.
mean, I don't know if you feel this way, Tracy, but every book is a little bit terrifying.
Yes,
Every book is
absolutely.
a little bit like, every book is like, I don't know if I can do this. It was terrifying. It also sort of coincided with kind of a big life event, which was that I found out my husband had been having a long affair, 2.5 years. And I think for the first time in my life, I thought, oh, wow, there's so much to dive into about betrayal. And um, I mean, so this story is, of course, not about a marriage betrayal,
Right.
but it's about friendship betrayal. And I think in many ways, some of the those most sort of formulative relationships of our lives are those early friendships with girls, friends, and then of course later marriage. And the next book I'm I'm going to take on the marriage betrayal. But it made me realize I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper to sort of these interpersonal relationships and to regular women, who are called upon to be extraordinary versus, being in extraordinary jobs and sort of
Mhm.
having, which I love. I mean, and I, of course, I love those stories too. And I think I will always have such a soft spot for, yeah, the police procedural or the law enforcement story. Um, but it was terrifying and then also kind of wonderful. It took
Yeah.
longer. It took longer because when you have a law enforcement officer, you sort of have this natural structure for the way her day goes, right?
Hmm.
Sort of what her job is and what her process is, who she turns to for help. She's got her, her CSI people, and then she's got her, the people in the legal side, and then she's got her other police officer people. And with this, I had to sort of figure out as a lay person, with no law enforcement background, who she would turn to. And she does, of course, turn to the police, at the urging of her husband. But they're not that helpful, right? Because, which makes sense. I mean, it's her best friend and she's only been gone for like, a few hours. And so they're not
Yeah.
particularly concerned. Only she feels like this is really, really out of character and not right. So it felt like a different animal, and it was fun to tackle. It was hard. I worked harder on this book than any other book for sure, by a long, by a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because for authors who this isn't a huge genre switch for you. Suspense thriller. You got the little subgenres and things like that. So it isn't like a huge leap for you, but it could be like what I call a palate cleanser for you because if you're writing in a series for quite a long time, it is kind of nice to uh, I don't know, try something different and
Yeah.
make you think in different ways. And yeah,
Yeah.
your imagination probably just sparks.
And the last books I've done have been, so I did, four standalone novels and then I've done three series. And this isn't obviously a standalone. There's no second book to Pinky Swear. And the next book will also be a standalone. I do love a series, you sort of like returning to friends that you know. But like you said, yeah, there's a lot more room to invent a world, and I think it's easier to have a real crisis in the life of a character who doesn't then have another crisis next year. You know what I mean? It starts to
Right.
get to the point where you're like, haven't we been, this poor character, you can only put them through the paces so many times.
And I have not written a standalone before, but I've heard authors who write them, they talk about how kind of like the sky's the limit, They're not all the characters are protected like sometimes they are in a series, although people are getting a little bit more creative in that regard too, even with series. But yeah, with a standalone, you can kind of do whatever you want to do, and so that must be thrilling as well.
Yeah, it is. Exactly. You don't have to keep everyone alive because they're not necessary for the next book. That is freeing. And also, I do think you have a lot more, you have room to play with bringing in new characters, and you don't have to think about like, if I bring this character in, where is he or she going to
Yeah.
fit in the next book? It's very much you're just creating this sort of one stage. And and it's fun. And the thing is, when you think about it, when you do this, probably I'm sure too, but when you think about a series, you're always trying to figure out sort of how are you going to sort of plant the beginning of the next book. So you have to sort of have this like you have an arc, but then you're also worrying about the bigger arc, and
Yeah.
and so yeah, there's a lot less of that. You're doing it, you're world building in a bigger way, but you're not worried so much about sort of like a massive arc. So it is different. I mean, it's obviously it's still similar in some ways, but it's also very different.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. Well, you did an amazing job capturing that dynamic between the three teenage girls. And I was curious, did you draw from experiences that you had during that age or your daughter, or was it all imagination?
Well, I mean, it was mostly imagination. I feel like at my age, I can barely remember my daughter's teenage years, let alone my own. And that's not, I mean, you can remember enough of it. I think the first thing I did was to read some YAs. because what and I also tried to look very specifically for that time frame. So 2008 is not when I was a teenager, obviously. And it wasn't when my daughter was a teenager. She was much younger. So it was a sort of, a spot between us. And I wanted to know kind of what the world was like then, right? Because
Hmm.
it was pre-cell phones, obviously, but it was, or pre-cell phones for kids mostly, but
Yeah.
it was also, a different world. I mean, they had all these different, things and different pressures, and so I did a lot of reading, and then once you sort of read, it does trigger, or at least it did for me, that sort of like, oh yeah, I remember how hard that was, right? How you always
Yeah.
thought everyone was talking about you, no one liked you. You were always like, why am I being left out of this? What, where did they go without me? I mean, I have to go do this thing with my parents and I can't go. And it's just everything about it feels so, catastrophic in every moment. I
Hmm.
think that is what it feels like to be a teenage girl. So it didn't take very much research to get back to that headspace. So then I just was able to play with the three characters who are all very different from me, but there's little pieces, of course, of me in each of them. I mean, I think the thing that I remember, and I am the oldest of four, and my next sibling is 4 years younger. So there's a little bit of isolation. Like now, 4 years seems like nothing, but back then, if I'm in high school and she's in middle school, I'm in middle school and she's in elementary school, it was a massive gap. We didn't have anything
Hmm.
in common, it seemed like. So
Hmm.
it's isolating, even in your family, right? Your parents, they don't really understand, or you don't think they do, and your siblings don't really understand. So you end up being sort of isolated. And I think that's why those friendships become so crucial.
Yeah, I liked one. I won't get the line exactly right, but it was I believe you were in Lexi's point of view, and you were talking about how whenever you're a teenager and you're by yourself, home alone, or whatever, that you feel like you're missing out on something. But then as an adult, when you're home alone, it's like, oh, I'm
I
by myself.
know.
I have time to myself finally, you know?
Right. Well, thankfully, right? Thankfully that we grow. I think, but yeah, I of course, and I think, and I think it's also so exhausting because the whole time you're a teenager, when you're with people, you're always putting on a show as to who you
Yeah,
are, right? You're
yeah,
pretending to be cooler or, more relaxed or more graceful or athletic or pretty or whatever it is. You're just, it's
yeah.
such a sort of all of it is for show, and that's so exhausting. As adults, I think we still probably do that, and then
Oh, but yeah.
we go home and shut the door and wipe it all off and just like sat on the couch like potatoes. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a hard age. And I think I can't even imagine. I think it's so much harder now.
Mm. Oh
Um,
gosh, yeah, with all the social media pressures and just the whole body issue. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
it'd be tough. All right.
So
Well,
tough.
I love that you gave Lexi what I call such a big heart. You know, she took in her friend that she hadn't seen in like I think it was 16 years or so. And then she made these connections with folks like Terrence and Damon and Gladys, who were all really fun and amazing characters. So I feel like characterization is like one of your superpowers. Would you agree, or does it come naturally to you, or is that something you really got to work on?
It's funny. Lexi was hard for me. She was hard for me she had to have such a big character arc. Lexi was somebody who sort of got shuffled along in her life, right? Her parents were, kind of stoic and not emotional and pretty critical. And Lexi was sort of always a little bit softer and a little more emotional. And I think, judged herself pretty and was felt judged for that. And so she sort
Hmm.
of doesn't really she doesn't really go after what she wants, and in many ways she doesn't really even know what she wants, right?
Right.
She's happily married to Henry. She loves his kids. She doesn't really work. She works in a flower shop. Like everything about her life is sort of just like, happened to her, until this one thing where she's like, I really now I want this thing to happen, and then of course it doesn't happen easily, and she has to fight for it. So I wanted her character arc by the time like where the prologue is, and you're seeing her confront that man, and she's being very bold and brazen. She's wielding a knife.
Yeah.
To go from where she starts at the beginning of the actual, book timeline in the present day to that point has to be kind of a really big trajectory.
Mm.
It was hard to find her footing. For me, it was hard to find the footing of who she was, um, before, Mara came back and the baby, and before Mara disappeared, I mean, and I think that was, I just took drafts, just took drafts and drafts. And I actually think I was a little judgy of her. It's funny, I don't know if you do this. I feel like I'm kind of sometimes judgmental of my characters. I'm like, come on, get it together, which I think is probably like a voice talking to me as a kid, or I don't know what it is. But it took a long time. I had a lot of, my editors was incredible, is incredible. My agent is incredible. And a lot of people sort of helped me kind of find the nuance of that.
Okay.
But I'm
Oh,
grateful, but
that's
I
great.
also think, I do think that's something that I don't know how, if people can really do an incredible, character work in a first draft. I know I can't. It's like five, six, draft five or six where I start to be like, oh, okay, now I see who you
Yeah.
are,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's different in a series because then you kind of, by the time you do book two or three, right, you kind of know them. But in a standalone, it took a while. But I am really tickled with the way she turned out. I really am. And she makes some
Yeah.
really bad decisions, let's be clear. And she makes them, I think, because I actually really do believe that in this, with the stakes what they are, um, I think in the moment they seem like the only choice. And only in hindsight or with a little distance could you be like, well, that was a bad decision, you know?
Yeah, 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 absolutely. It's interesting that you say that it takes you 4 or 5 drafts to get to know your character. I just had an interview with Susan Elizabeth Phillips, and
Yeah.
she said it takes her normally 9 months to get to know her character. And so it's like, it's really interesting, isn't it? That it takes
Yes.
that amount of time to really live in that character's shoes, I think, it's
Yeah,
very
and I think
interesting.
there's a lot of false start. I think if you think about like making a new friend, right? And the way that you sort of like the way you sort of first you sort of look at how they how they present themselves and what they wear and how they talk and who their, you know, other friends or family or whatever. And then it takes it takes like the sort of then hearing them say something else and being like, "Oh, that doesn't really match with that." Right? Not that
Yeah,
people are
yeah,
lying even necessarily, but that there's so many sides. And I think it's similar. I think, and I mean, I don't know about Susan. I think for me, I try to do a lot of the character work before I start writing. So like
mm,
I'm working now on, obviously the next book, and but I have been in those lives already, for over a year, trying to sort of sort out who those people are. And so it helps, it helps me. But again, it's not so much even that I don't have a sense for who they are. It's just that to get it to show up on the page in the right way takes a bunch
yeah.
of drafts. Um, but yeah, I think I do think it's sort of similar, I think, to getting to know somebody new in your life.
That's true. That's
Nobody
true.
sort of
Yeah, it
we
takes a
don't,
while, doesn't it?
yeah, we don't
Yeah,
tend to sort of show it all up front.
yeah. That would be weird.
Lest we scare everybody.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. We would have no friends at all.
We wouldn't. We would be like, stay away from her. She's scary.
Well, on this show, we like to talk about the story stakes. I always joke, love, death, the fate of the realm. They're all wonderful high stakes in a story, but I like to hear a little bit more about what's more personally at stake for your character, and maybe Lexi might be the one that you would focus on for this story. What happens if Lexi doesn't succeed? What's on the line for her?
Right. I mean, as a mother, right? I mean, this is, I think you think about, I remember my very, very first book is about she's an FBI agent and she has a young daughter and, she's attacked, the mother is attacked by a serial killer that she's been tracking. And I think, there's risk to the child during that book. And I think, and I didn't even have a baby then. That book came out when my daughter was 8 months old. So I had written it and sold it before she was born. And I mean, I think I spoke about being a mother as though I knew what it was like to be a mother. I think we have that. I think the stakes are the baby, right? The stakes are, and if you can imagine, like, I think for every mother, I mean, I would think the worst possible situation is to lose a child, right? What's different about the stakes for Lexi here is that she could potentially lose a child she's never even met, a
Yeah,
child she didn't carry, a child that she is the biological mother of, but that she's really not had any sort of opportunity to know in any real way, hold, touch, grow, feel flutter inside her. It's all very distant. And I think for her, if that's the thing she wants most in the world, which it is, I mean, I have to imagine it would be crippling. Um,
Yeah.
and then the not knowing. And I think this is sort of one of those things I think that it comes up a lot with, in missing persons cases and missing children is, you know, we people talk about it would be so much worse to never know what happened, right? Even if knowing means knowing that your child is gone and was killed or, something horrible, the not knowing is worse. And I think for Lexi, um, I think for Lexi, that would be that the stakes are that high. But it's interesting. I think, when we go back to the 2008 chapters, you also see the stakes for Kate. Kate is the character
Mm.
who doesn't survive high school. And I think each of those young women has, you know, the high stakes. And I actually do think that if you can give, and even in like Terrence and Damon, right, everybody
Yeah,
sort of has a stake. And
they do. Yeah.
I love looking at, what are the stakes for each of the characters, and of course the villain has a stake too. And I think if you can, increase those and put pressure on them, and especially if they're in opposition to one another, it's a really
Hmm.
fun way to ramp up tension and drive momentum in the plot, and it makes for, fun, fast reading. As a reader, I love it when the stakes get higher, and I also feel a little sick to my stomach when the stakes get higher. You're like, oh no, this is terrible.
Well, and
Mm.
it's what makes it such a wonderfully layered story too, whenever you have stakes coming from all different directions at all different levels. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's such a good story.
But I
And
hadn't
I
thought that way. I mean, I'm sorry.
that's
I
okay.
think about that. I mean, I obviously the stakes for Lexi were really clear, but I don't know if I thought about what the stakes would be for some of the minor characters.
Mm.
Do you do that when is the stakes, is that sort of how you get into a story?
No, not really. I don't know that I've ever put any forethought into the stakes for the minor characters.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Mm-mm.
Sometimes
No,
they end up
that's
with stakes, and
interesting.
that I think makes it more, like you said, just makes it more interesting. But yeah, it would be quite a puzzle to put together if you were trying to figure out.
Right.
And obviously, the villain always has stakes, right? Because of the opposition
Yeah.
of the protagonist. But everybody else, if they do, though, I think it did end up being kind of lovely. But I didn't really plan it that way.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but
Yeah.
towards the end, whenever things come to a head and the scene in the closet,
Yeah. Yeah.
I was doing a little nail biting,
I know.
Danielle. I was doing a
That's
little
the
nail
scene.
biting.
That scene was been in my head. That's the scene that was in my head really even since the pandemic. And
Okay.
I wrote a book called The Surrogate, which featured a woman in law enforcement and a surrogate. And that scene came right at the front of that book. And then I finished the book and it just didn't feel right. And I think the talk about stakes, right? The stakes for the surrogate weren't high enough, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they were high because she was carrying somebody else's baby, but they weren't high enough. So that book was one of I've done this, I think early in my career, I have done this where I've written a whole book and put it in a drawer somewhere, but I haven't done it so recently. But that scene, I put that aside and then I wrote two more books in the Badland Thriller series. I wrote Far Gone and Up Close. And then I just kept coming back to it and thinking, what can I do with that scene? So people who read the
Yeah.
book are like, oh my God, but I have
No,
had
it
that
was
scene. I had to
great.
get it out, Tracy. I'd had that scene in
Yeah.
my head for so
Yeah, it
long.
was it was a very visual and
Yeah.
visceral
Yeah,
scene.
I know.
I'll leave it at that.
I know.
Folks,
But
read the book
it's
just
the
for
sort
that
of,
scene alone, if nothing else.
I know, it's the penultimate sort of, you
Yeah.
know, growth for Lexi to be bold enough to make those moves, right? I mean, I
Yes.
think that's
Yeah.
where we see who
I
she
can't
is.
imagine it. I cannot imagine having to make that decision. That was
No,
just, yeah,
no, I
yeah,
know. And hopefully we
yeah.
never will.
Yeah,
Let's just
exactly.
avoid that, I think.
All right. Well, as I mentioned in the intro, you're not only a best-selling author, but you're the creator and host of Killer Women podcast. Podcasting is a lot of work, so you really have to love it. So I was curious if you want to just tell us about your show, because that's how I first became aware of you. So it's interesting how these things all work out, and maybe what you love about being a podcaster.
Thank you. I started that. That was a pandemic project too. I live in Montana, which is obviously really isolated. And when they closed down conferences and stuff, I just didn't have any thriller writer friends. I had a few phone calls, but I just thought I need that. I wanted that, those interactions. And I think we were all felt weirdly stilted and stunted in our work
Hmm.
and in the world, and our kids were home. I think for me, it was a weirdly lonely when you're all together kind of
Yeah.
moment. And um and so I just started with and thought, well, I'm just going to have some conversations with some thriller authors. And I chose women because, as you know, there's so many thriller authors. And I just didn't feel like I could look at the world of thriller authors and ever sort of make distinctions between, would I pick noir? Would I pick, I wanted to
Right.
just, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna talk to women. And also at that age, I was in my, at that point I was, my late 40s, early 50s. And I really do sort of think nowadays, like I kind of just I want to talk to women. I want to hear
Yeah.
like how, and I wanted to hear women talk about how they sort of like, you know, marry these dark things in our heads with the sort of, being a mother, a sister, a daughter, and also because we're supposed to always be, sort of bright and cheery and hostessy, and
Yeah.
yet at the same time, you're plotting murder. So I wanted to sort of dive into that, and that, of course, for me was with women. And I've had so much fun. I think we just um recorded episode like 211 or 12
Wow.
is where we are. I know.
That's
It's
amazing.
insane.
Yeah.
And I've had everybody from, Sandra Brown with her 112, New York Times bestsellers, and Karen Slaughter, and Lisa Jewell's been on the shows a couple times, to debut authors. And I really love a debut author,
Yeah.
because the world is so exciting, and it's, it's all new everything's all new, and you get to hear the new voices, and everything in between. And I've had some people come back more than once. Got a little crazy, and my first full year of doing it, I think I did 63 episodes, and I read every book start to
Yes.
finish. I
Yeah.
want to be able to talk about, we don't do spoilers, like you, but I want to be able to talk about the sort of like characters, and the especially the female characters, and the themes, to do that you really have to read the whole book. And I got to the point where I was like, this is crazy. I can't do this. So
Yeah.
went from 63 to 48 to 46, and now this year I'm trying to keep it at 36. That's my,
Yeah.
and we'll see. I mean, it's hard. There's so many wonderful books.
It is. It's hard. They come into your inbox or across your desk or in the mail, however you get them, and it's so hard to say no.
So
It's like
hard.
you want to read it, you want to talk to them, you want to
Yeah.
get the word out. It
Yeah.
is so hard. Yes, I'm struggling in the same way that you
Yeah.
did early on.
I think we all are, and I think we do. I mean, I love, like, the pay it forward part of it, which you talked about right at the beginning. I think there is this idea that, we can support, readers finding books. And I don't I people always say, "Oh, wow, you thriller authors are so supportive of one another." I don't really feel like there's sort of this idea of competition, because readers, they don't read, one book a year. At best, I'm giving you one book a year, and probably not
Yeah.
even. They read 100, some readers read 100 and something books a year, or 200 books a year. So I'm happy to be somebody who's like, oh, you should try this or try this. It's just, yeah, the nature of it is time consuming. And it is,
It is. Yeah.
it's tricky. I love it. So I'm going to, instead of, letting it sort of get too out of hand, I'm trying to sort of manage it so that I can be successful at it without it,
Yeah.
um, so.
Yeah. I hear
And
you.
how many
Yep.
do you do?
Absolutely. Well, last year I did 60, like
Yeah.
60 flat, and then I that's whenever I was focused primarily on romance, and then I basically rebranded the podcast to High Stakes so that I could talk with different authors in different
Yeah.
genres and things
Yeah.
like that. So I'm doing quite a few in January and February just to kind of, jumpstart the podcast, get those
Yep.
algorithms happy and things like that. But then I want to then I want to calm down to maybe one a week,
Yeah.
and do that's ultimately what I'd like is just one a
Yeah.
week. I can do that no problem. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So
yeah, it's a labor of love. And people are so grateful. I get lots of fun comments from people like, "Oh, I discovered that book from your
yeah,
podcast," or and it's how I discover books, really. I don't
yeah.
think I would. I mean, obviously you're aware of your little circle of friends books, but I wouldn't know so many of the books that I have read are come from Killer Women. So.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, my last question to you here is what is one thing readers might be surprised to learn about you?
What is one thing? Oh gosh, huh? Well, I'm actually kind of a terrified of, public speaking, and so I'm about to go on tour, and everyone's like, "Oh no, you're gonna be great. You're so, you seem so fine, comfortable." But I am somebody who's gonna be like a little sick to my stomach sitting in front of
Oh, yeah.
any group of people. And I think because Killer Women, I feel so comfortable because we're always talking about somebody else's book. And
Right.
it's a different beast to talk about your own book. So I think I'm completely socially awkward. So if I seem that way in real life or it's because it's true. I'm
Oh,
a little awkward. So
all right. Well, that's I I feel for you because I feel the same way. I'm just fine talking with folks about their own books, but to try to get me to provide a summary of my own book is like pulling teeth.
I know
It's so hard to be the marketer for your book, for
it
sure.
is so hard. Yes. And I've got a copy of I got the final ones in the mail.
Oh yeah, there you yeah, mine's just an advanced reader copy. Yeah, that's great. Oh,
I
thank you
did
for
love
sharing that.
I did not have nothing to do with this, of course, but I do love what they did. I think they did a great job with the cover. And it's my favorite part is when the covers come in and you get
Oh
to
my
see.
gosh. Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
And they even included on some of the chapters a little image of the pink,
Yeah, the
the
little
hand.
graphic of the
Yeah.
two fingers entwined.
Yes,
Yeah, I know.
that's
Isn't
great.
that cute?
Such a
That's
wonderful
those past
title too.
chapters.
Yeah.
They do that. I know. They did really clever little things. That's like right here. You
There
can
you
see it.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that fun?
Yeah, so
Nice.
really, they did a great job. I'm super. I've been really grateful to so much hard work has gone into this book. So, and
Yeah,
some of it mine, of course, but a lot of it not. So it takes a village. So, and
it
I'm great.
does.
Thank you for having me on the show too. I really
Oh,
so
yeah,
appreciate it.
absolutely. Well, before we go, can you share what's coming up next? Is it number two? And do you have a date, or can you not talk
Well,
about
so
any of that yet?
it's so funny. I actually got an email last week from my editor who was like, "So are you still on for your May 1st delivery of the next book?" And I was like, "What?" I didn't even know I had a May 1st delivery. So that was if the book was going to come out kind of March of 27. So we have pushed that back. It will be out early 28. So I'll have
Okay.
2 years between books. It's called Happy Ending, and
Okay.
it is about a woman whose husband has a long affair with a massage therapist. And the massage therapist is, murdered early on, but not by the obvious suspects. So everybody's got a secret, and it's interesting. It's been fun. I mean, I'm tapping into my,
Yeah.
female rage, but also I think tapping into sort of exploring marriage, long marriage, and so I don't know too much about it yet. I
Yeah.
have 100 pages. I kind of know enough, but that's about where I am, and it'll be out early 28. So
Great. Well, we will
see how
keep
that
an eye
develops.
out for that and hopefully have you back to talk about it.
I would
That'd
love
be
it.
amazing. Well, folks, be sure to order your copy of Pinky Swear today. As I mentioned earlier, it has a delicious twist at the end that you'll love, and the visceral, cringy kind of scene you have to watch or read as well. So be sure to pick up your copy. You can learn more about Danielle by visiting her website at daniellegirard.com. You'll find all of her social media links and podcast links there. So, and also sign up for her newsletter too. Be sure to do that. Danielle, thank you so much for joining me. It was so great touching base with you again.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I really appreciate it. What a great way to spend a morning. And thank you to everyone who's listening and supporting us as well. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah, you bet. And have an amazing book tour. You're going to do fabulous.
We'll see. Anyway, I'm really excited.
Yeah. That's it for today's high stakes story. Follow the show so the next episode lands right in your feed. And if you enjoyed today's chat, a quick rating or review helps new listeners find us. Visit tracydevlyn.com/podcast for show notes and links to today's amazing guest and their fabulous book. High Stakes is a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. Thanks for listening. Until next time, enjoy the adventure, everyone.